Look, I'm not basic.
So I watched Emily in Paris, this Netflix show that everybody really hates. And I don't know, don't yell at me, I just wanted to know what the fuss was about. My girlfriend watched this show and she told me that it's bad and kinda stupid, and paired with the horrible reception it got online, bad and kinda stupid was the only information I had about the show. But Lily Collins is in this show and I like Lily Collins, so I decided to sit down and watch the whole thing just to see why people were so upset about it. And yeah, it's pretty bad. I think I can say with confidence that Emily in Paris is probably the dumbest TV series I have watched in years. And that's coming from someone who watched all 7 seasons of Pretty Little Liars. I have no shortage of guilty pleasure TV under my belt, but Emily in Paris is so bad on so many levels that it's not really fun to watch. Because the show is not only mediocre, it's also really boring, and that's from the first episode to the last one. The energy never really picks up. But people were not upset at the show for being boring. They weren't even mad that it was bad. People hate this show because of the really inappropriate and inaccurate way it portrays French culture. Now, that's what immediately piqued my attention, because it just so happens that I am French, and it just so happens that I am from Paris. So the show's portrayal of my city felt really interesting, and I couldn't wait to see how bad they screwed it up. At first I thought I was going to watch the show and just laugh my ass off at how inaccurate it all is, but I was wrong.
Oh.
I genuinely felt insulted by this show more than once, and the more it kept going, the more I understood why so many people around the world were so upset at it. Emily in Paris has a huge racism problem, and not just against French people, but we'll talk about that more later. It is a brutally ignorant show, but it is so confident in its ignorance that it also ends up coming across as arrogant. And I'm not exactly a politically correct snowflake, but this is one specific case where I understand the outrage, and I'm gonna try to break down the show and explain why it is so problematic. So hold on to your butts, because there's a lot of dumb shit to go through here. So Emily in Paris is the story of Emily Cooper, a young marketing executive from the United States of America who is sent by her boss to join a marketing firm in Paris, where she's supposed to give them an American point of view to help their business. Now, don't look at me, I have no idea what that means either. It's just, just accept it, okay? So she leaves Chicago and makes her way to France, leaving her boyfriend behind, and we follow her as she tries to navigate the new city and the cultural differences she needs to overcome. And that's kind of it, that's the gist of the show. An American girl leaves America and she's really confused. Now, in essence, that's not a bad plot. There's a lot to do with this. But while the fish out of water story is the basis of Emily in Paris, well, the show is not really interested in following that. Now for starters, you should know that when people say Emily in Paris portrays French culture in a very insulting way, they're not exaggerating. They really dropped the ball here, like they really messed up. People around the world and major outlets in France have called this show embarrassing, and before watching it myself, I thought people were probably being too hard on it. But now that I've watched it, no, they're right, it's pretty embarrassing. The creators of the show keep saying that it is a love letter to French culture, but it definitely doesn't feel like one. Not only because of how insulting it is, we'll get to that in a minute, but because just by watching the first episode, it became very clear to everybody that the people behind this show do not know the first thing about French culture, but in a way that's kinda shameful.
It's amazing, isn't it? The entire city looks like Ratatouille.
Ratatouille is a dish. What are you talking about? Everything that is represented on screen is either some lazy made-up bullshit or an extremely degrading cliche that has no basis whatsoever. Emily in Paris isn't a love letter to France. It's an American vanity project. The show portrays French people as a bunch of bumbling idiots, but Americans are portrayed as a people the world idolizes, respects, and even looks up to. The French in this show think Americans are the greatest, and they aspire to be more like them. And as a French person myself, yeah, no, that's not accurate. In the first episode, everyone is really rude to Emily at work, and nobody wants to listen to her, so I didn't think it was that excessive, but then, I shit you not, you get a scene where one of her coworkers tells her that the reason they've been so rude to her at work is because her American thinking is so next level that it inspires them to work harder, and they think it's intimidating. And I know it sounds like I'm making this shit up, but I promise you, it's a real thing.
We are all a little afraid of you.
What? Afraid of me? How?
Your ideas, they are more new. Maybe they're better. And maybe we feel we have to work harder, make more money. You live to work. We work to live.
Oh, fuck me. This show is a fucking joke. Every time you start thinking that it might be a little self-aware with its silliness, the writers will pull something out of nowhere that will remind you that, no, this show's not self-aware at all. Not only do the writers really think that's how French people are, they also really seem to think that the outside world thinks Americans are fucking superheroes. I hate this show. Did I mention that already? Alright, obviously I got a lot of shit to say, but before we continue, we need to talk about the biggest problem with Emily in Paris, which is Emily herself. Emily is one of the worst protagonists I have seen in a while, and that's including this guy. She is truly awful as a character, and despite Lily Collins doing a great job in the role, even she cannot make up for how unlikable Emily is.
Excuse me, pardon, monsieur? I ordered this medium and it's still kind of bloody.
Elle aimerait son steak mieux cuit, s'il vous plaît.
Yeah, what she said.
The chef tells me the steak is correct.
Well, correct for him, but not correct for me.
I suggest you try it.
Maybe you suggest you cook it longer?
Yeah, I'll take yours.
No, no, no.
You take mine.
Come on. The customer is always right. Maybe I'll educate the chef a little bit about customer service.
You think you're gonna change the entire French culture by sending back a steak?
But I'm an agreeable person. People like me. That's my strength.
She is so obnoxious. She's condescending, entitled, and at times sort of racist. She's also an extremely disloyal friend. She has no respect for people's personal boundaries, and she's actually really bad at her job. And, am I forgetting something? Oh yeah, she has sex with an underage kid in this show. An underage kid who is also her friend's little brother. Oh, and if that's not enough, she's also fucking that same friend's boyfriend behind her back. You're having fun yet? Now, Emily being an asshole in itself is not really a problem. Flawed characters are all over the place and they can be great. The problem with all of this is the fact that Emily is never presented as being a bad person. The show really wants you to root for her, and it's like the writers did not realize how unlikable she was. If there was some sort of arc for her in which she realized the errors of her ways and tried to be a better person and blah blah blah, well, I'd be on board with that. I love a good redemption story. But that's not the case here. The show has no idea that she's a terrible person. She goes around doing awful stuff to people all season long, and by the time the story ends, she has learned nothing. She is 100% validated in her bullshit, and she's actually thriving. She has no character arc whatsoever during these 10 episodes. It's kind of infuriating to watch, actually.
I'm sorry if I don't fit into your spreadsheet, but I like our life in Chicago.
This is Paris!
Oh, God, you're about to say something stupid, aren't you?
This city is filled with love and romance and light and beauty and passion and sex, which are clearly things that mean nothing to you. You know what? You can keep your precious air miles.
Stop it. Get some help.
Her behavior is so appalling, but what makes her even more annoying is that she seems to think that everyone else is the problem and not her. She's not in the wrong because she makes no effort to fit in. The French are wrong because they're not adapting to her presence. Her boss Sylvie is portrayed as a big meanie who is rude because she's always annoyed with Emily. But it makes complete sense for her to be mad at her. She was expecting to work with the boss of an American firm who studied French culture and fashion, and instead she got an underqualified employee with no experience in fashion who doesn't even speak the language. She has every right to be annoyed. She runs massive operations. She needs to get shit done. She doesn't have time for Emily and her bullshit.
Look, you come to Paris. You walk into my office. You don't even bother to learn the language. You treat the city like it's your amusement park. And after a year of food, sex, wine, and maybe some culture, you'll go back from where you came. So, perhaps we'll work together. But no, we won't be friends.
One plus one, shut the fuck up.
During the entire show, Emily tries to teach the French that doing things the American way is the right way to do things. The show even goes as far as implying that doing things the American way will make her coworkers better people outside of their professional lives. Remember when I said this show is an American vanity project? Do you believe believe me now? And the show doubles down on that quite a bit. Emily in Paris is very committed to making French people look as awful as possible. For some reason, everyone in Paris is really rude to Emily, and it's like really distracting how extreme they make it seem. And the only people who aren't mean to her are men who want to fuck her. And I am not kidding when I say that every man she comes in contact with immediately becomes obsessed with her because she's American, and I guess they think it's exotic or something. Also, everywhere she goes, she just happens to meet a perfect white dreamy Frenchman who not only falls madly in love with her within 3 seconds of meeting her, but also speaks perfect English. That's actually a big logical issue with this show. The entirety of the story is about Emily trying to fit in this new country, but the show never really commits to showing the massive language barrier she should be facing. She doesn't speak a word of French, but she also shows no interest in actually learning to speak French whatsoever. And yet she can just navigate Paris like it's nothing, as if language is just a very minor inconvenience to her. And aside from a couple of scenes that are trying to be comedic, Emily has no problem communicating with people. It's so ridiculous that it becomes kind of funny after a while. But yeah, aside from a bunch of men who are way too horny for their own good, every French person Emily comes across is portrayed as an absolute asshole. According to the show, French people are stupid, sexist, racist, disagreeable, lazy, snob, impatient, condescending. They start working at 10:30 in the morning and they still manage to be late. They have sex at work. They all cheat on their partners. They're negligent, they're weird. And the list goes on, honestly.
For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Emily Cooper, and I'm so excited to be here in Paris. I'm looking forward to getting to know each and every one of you, and likewise having you get to know me. Your name, monsieur?
My name is Luc.
Yes, Luke.
Why are you shouting?
Sorry.
And when they're not showing you French people being assholes, American characters are sitting around talking about how French people are assholes.
Yes, of course I love Paris. And the food is so delicious, the fashion so chic, the lights so magical. But the people, so mean.
I don't get it. What's the point of being married if you're just gonna cheat on your spouse?
Maybe after you're married for 20 years, you might feel differently. I mean, the French are romantics, but they're also realists.
You told French people this? No wonder they hate you.
Oh, not just this. They disagree with everything I say.
That's the French way. They're very disagreeable.
Now, if you don't know, the backlash over this terrible representation got so intense that the cast of the show eventually had to address it publicly. Lily Collins admitted that they kinda dropped the ball and that while the reception of the show was heartbreaking, she believes the criticism will give them a chance to improve in the future. Oh yeah, the show was renewed for a second season, by the way, because God gave up on us a long time ago. But the response from the cast that killed me the most came from one of the French actors on the show, more specifically Lucas Bravo, who plays one of Emily's numerous conquests. And he claims, I shit you not, that the show's depiction of Paris is accurate, but it is only a very small and specific part of Paris. Which, buddy, that's not true. Why are you lying to me? Are you a spy? Were you sent by the Americans to infiltrate our culture? Who are you? Who do you work for? He later admitted that the show may be relying on cliches a little too much, but I guess he just didn't want to talk badly about his employers. I understand that, I'm not mad. But if all that is not proof enough for you of how they treat the French as caricatures, there's literally a scene where Emily sleeps with a guy, and he then refuses to shower because he doesn't want to wash her off of him yet. And they make it look like it's just a regular ass French quirk, like we all do this and we all think it's romantic or something. There's another scene where Emily tries to communicate with one of her coworkers, and her coworker gets scared because Emily is speaking English, so she just runs away. Like, she just leaves the office. And the show thinks it's really funny because it pulls the same joke twice in the same episode, which actually leads me to another one of my biggest problems with Emily in Paris. The show is not funny. And yes, I know that's not necessarily a problem. A lot of my favorite shows are not exactly funny. But the problem here is that Emily in Paris really thinks that it's funny. But it's not. It has some of the most cringeworthy comedy I have seen in a really long time, and it kind of ruins most of the show, honestly. The dialogue is really bad, yeah, and I know that comedy is subjective, but given how the show was received, I don't think I'm gonna be in the minority here. And I'm not kidding when I tell you that this show has no idea what comedic timing is. It's completely off.
Sorry, I don't speak French.
American?
Yes. But did you think that I was French?
Honestly, no, I was being polite. You look American.
Stop doing that. That's not how it works. Yeah, the comedy doesn't really work. Even the romantic aspect of the story is kind of bland. Emily's main love interest in this show is this dude, the spy from earlier. His name is Gabriel, he's a chef, and he's also Emily's neighbor. And their romance doesn't make a lot of sense. The show really needs you to believe that there's a lot of sexual tension between these two, but it never really feels like it because they never really have candid interactions. Every single time Emily interacts with Gabriel, it's because she needs something from him. One time she needs help moving boxes, the next time her shower's broken and she needs help communicating with the plumber. The time after that, she can't get a table at a fancy restaurant her boss wants to take a client to, so she calls Gabriel to get a table at his restaurant after it closes. And next time she loses a $2 million watch and needs Gabriel to drive her around Paris on his scooter to help her find the person who has it. And if she doesn't need him for her own personal motivations, she just accidentally runs into him. Which is funny because there is a trend in this show where Gabriel just appears wherever Emily is, conveniently at the exact moment she needs assistance for something. It's kinda ridiculous, but really it just goes to show how lazy the writing is in this show. Even sequences that have very basic dialogue lack logic. French characters will randomly have full conversations with each other in English for no reason, and sometimes the dialogue just doesn't make sense.
You're not working?
I'm working from home.
You didn't move to Paris to sit alone in your room.
Oh,
We're not taking no for an answer.
You didn't even ask anything yet. So yeah, Emily in Paris is a romantic comedy that isn't funny and is also really bad at developing romance. You guys really need to step up your game. Now, earlier in this video, I said that Emily in Paris also has a huge racism issue. And yeah, I was in parts talking about how they represent French culture, but that's not all of it. So if you've been paying close attention, you probably noticed that this show takes place in Paris. And according to statistics, Paris is one of the 5 most culturally diverse cities in the world. And if you didn't know, there are a lot of cities in the world. There are so many ethnicities, cultures, and stories coexisting in Paris. It has a very unique sense of identity in its look, its people, and its art. It's kind of beautiful, and that unique diversity is a big part of why I love Paris so much and why I'm so proud to have been born there. So imagine my surprise when I came to the appalling realization that out of its entire cast, Emily in Paris only has 2 characters of color. And saying that these 2 characters of color are entirely made of degrading cliches is the understatement of the century. The first non-white character in this show is Mindy. Mindy is Emily's friend. They randomly meet in a park one day and they bond over nothing and become very close. It's just as boring as the rest of the show, but hey, context. Mindy is a very dull character. She's loud and very eccentric, but that doesn't make a character interesting. Just like the rest of the cast, she has no arc, she barely has any reasons to be in this show, and after a while, you come to realize that Mindy is a character that has 2 functions. She says racist things, and she makes sex jokes. That's it. That's the only reason this character exists. When the show is not busy portraying French people as depraved creatures from hell, Mindy takes on some screen time to throw some racist shit at everyone else. It's kind of aggressive, but for you to understand why it makes me cringe so much, it's very important that you keep in mind that all of the racist things she says were written by white writers. And when you remember that while watching, it gets very uncomfortable very quickly.
You can't punish people for their thoughts. I'm from China. We've tried. Frenchmen never get tired of having sex. It's like docking them in a lightning port.
I mean, they can't all be mean.
Oh, yes they can. Chinese people are mean behind your back. French people, mean to your face. Just go to lunch and maybe avoid anywhere with steak knives. What? Sushi safe. Or anywhere that's Asian. Although if she's mad enough, a chopstick can puncture skin. Don't ask how I know that. I had my shot and I blew it.
No, you get more than one shot, Mindy.
In China, you only get 1 kid.
Everything is pas possible. It's the French motto.
This character cannot get through a single scene without making a racist comment, and after a while it gets a little distracting. Especially because she serves no other purpose in this show and her presence isn't really useful to the plot. She will just randomly appear in an episode and say some inherently racist stuff and some bad sex puns in a cafe.
Bon appetit. I'd bon appetit him.
and then that's it. You don't really see her again. And just to round out the stereotypes, there's a hilarious scene where Emily asks Mindy to sing for her in a public park. Oh yeah, there's a random subplot where you learn that Mindy was a failed pop star in China. It's really not important. And Mindy stands up and starts singing La Vie en Rose by Edith Piaf, which is the most cliché French song you can possibly think of. And that's not even the funny part. The funny part is that people around them stop dead in their tracks because they're blown away by Mindy singing La Vie en Rose. And it's supposed to be this like super charming and endearing sequence, but if you've lived in Paris, you know this would never happen. Paris is one of the busiest cities in the world. Everything moves 1 billion miles per hour. People don't have time for you. And if the people behind the show knew the French as well as they pretend to, they would know that nobody gives a fuck about hearing La Vie en Rose. It doesn't tingle our French spidey sense or something. It's not cute, it's not charming. Imagine a French person showing up to America and publicly singing Sweet Home Alabama in the middle of a park where people are just trying to chill. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a cute Saturday afternoon, does it? The other non-white character in this show is this guy, whose name I don't even remember because he's just that useless. He's one of Emily's co-workers and he's gay, and that right there is all the show is ever interested in telling you about him. He works with Emily and he's gay. And I had to read that he's gay online in an interview with the actor who plays him. The show doesn't even care about him enough to say that much. And the entire point of his existence in this show is to be the most stereotypical gay man the writers could possibly come up with. It's kind of hilarious how cliche he is. Literally all he does is stand in the background and act sassy. He doesn't have any other personality traits. We don't even know what his job is. He's always at the office, but we never see him actually doing work. Why are you here, dude? He's just the sassy gay guy, and the writers are so dismissive of him that I'm pretty sure they made him black so they can kill 2 birds with 1 stone and call the show inclusive. But really, they just wanted to tell a story about attractive white people. So he's in a lot of scenes, but he never really does anything. He's kind of just there, looking sassy. Emily in Paris has 2 characters of color, and both of them feel like an afterthought that was forced into the show because the producers had to check it off the list. And if they're not just throwing them in a scene to do nothing, they use these characters' voices to write racist things they find funny. Because no one can call you out on being racist against Asians if you're being racist through an Asian's mouth, right? I really hate this show. So yeah, Emily in Paris is as embarrassing as it gets. It's a show that romanticizes ignorance, and it's not difficult to see why people hate it so much. Paris is presented as an amusement park, French people are awful caricatures and degrading stereotypes, and basically everyone sucks unless they're American. Literally, I'm not kidding, the only French character who is immediately nice to Emily tells her that she's nice because she grew up watching American shows. I'm actually kinda shocked that a show like this is being made today, and nobody batted an eye before it was released. But then again, Netflix released Cuties, so what the fuck do I know? And outside of all this sea of cultural bullshit, the show is just really fucking boring. It's just bad. It doesn't really have a story. Emily is a terrible protagonist, which kills all the fun of following her shenanigans. Her social interactions make no sense, and even within the context of her career, which is at the center of the show, every good thing she does or accomplishes at work is either by complete accident or by comedic luck. So there's nothing engaging there either. Oh yeah, there's this entire side story where Emily becomes a social media influencer, but halfway through the season that story just disappears and it's never mentioned again. Did I mention she sleeps with an underage kid in this show? I feel like I should mention that again. No joke, I can't really see anyone above the age of 12 enjoying this show because nothing really happens in it. Emily in Paris is just a bunch of random scenes stitched together in chronological order. The characters are all pointless, everyone is just kind of there all the time, so everything is really dull and it feels uninspired as hell. Every episode relies on a series of impossible coincidences to be coherent, and the dialogue is just as lazy as the rest of the writing. Everything about this show is superficial and just painfully surface level. It has no depth whatsoever. I like my fun guilty pleasure shows, but this is just not it. And I bet you can guess that I'm probably not gonna be watching season 2. I would also be really surprised if the show gets renewed for a season 3. I'll give Emily in Paris 2 out of 10 ninja stars. Go find another show to watch, you're better than this.